Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Color Authority. Today, I'm going to be talking to Julia Hamilton. Julia is an artist who has synesthesia, which is a condition in which someone experiences things through their senses in an unusual way. For example, by experiencing a color as a sound or a number as a position in space. A person with synesthesia may see, for example, the number 2 as a green number and the number 5 as a red number. Now, Julia Hamilton enjoys creating intricate line drawings, mixed media paintings, and physical digital installations in her hometown of Columbus, Ohio. She has loved creating art since her childhood. Julia Hamilton studied art at the University of Cincinnati. Worried, however, this could not become a full-time job, she turned to IT and had a very successful career working in computer sciences. In 2017, Hamilton was able to make her full-time profession art, fulfilling a long-life dream. She continues to work in IT, but only part-time, allowing her to make her art practice her primary focus. Currently, she's working on mixed paintings, physical digital installations. She continues taking inspiration from her synesthesia and science. In 2020, she began working on a body of pandemic-themed work that explores the ways our lives have changed in recent months. And we're going to talk all about this just right now. Good morning and welcome, Julia. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
You are calling in from your beautiful artistic studio, your art studio back at home, right?
Yes, I'm in Columbus, Ohio.
Well, I wanted to welcome you to the Color Authority. I'm excited to have you here, also because we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, and a topic that within my community of color expert has been discussed, and it remains a big mystery to those who are obviously not having synesthesia. So we'll dive into that topic in a little while. But first, I wanted to ask you, what is color to you?
Color is like a constant companion for me because I have a form of synesthesia called Graphene Synesthesia, which it's numbers and letters having color. So it's hard to imagine not having numbers or letters in your head. It's like right now I'm talking, so I have letters, words, so between language and numbers, I'm always having flashes of color in my head.
So it's almost like a friend. It's somebody who or somebody who accompanies you throughout your day.
Yep.
It is for me, but that's because I decided to work in color. But it's interesting how it is, just as you said, it's a companion in life. So you have what doctors call a neurologic condition that is called synesthesia. Now, some people may be familiar with that term. Some who are listening may not. Can you explain a little bit what synesthesia is? And indeed, maybe a little bit more in detail, what's the exact type? Because there's many types I read of synesthesia that you have.
Yeah, so it's a neurological condition, but it's not a bad thing. And part of the reason why little is known about synesthesia is that there's no like race for the cure, or it's not people who go into neurology and want to improve people's lives will take on migraines or like brain cancer or diseases, things that where they can really help a lot of people. So synesthesia, there are people that have done research on synesthesia, and there's more and more to be read about synesthesia, but it is not a big research area just because it doesn't need to be cured, and the people, for the most part, the people that I've known that have synesthesia are happy with having it. So, okay, let's a little bit more about what synesthesia is.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, the real simple definition is that it's a crossing of the senses. And that definition has never really worked for me because it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it's sensory. So what works better for me is the idea of there being extra attributes associated with a thing where it doesn't, or a concept where it doesn't make sense that those attributes are there, but they are. And they're and for me, the best way I think is to give an example. So the number 5, represents, this many. I'm holding up my hand with 5 fingers, right? So you get that number 5. And simultaneously and equally powerful, it's red. Okay. And I can't take the redness away from 5 any more than I can take the 5-ness away from 5. It's just red. Mm-hmm. And 5 is also male and kind of young and a little bit sexy. So that's another type of synesthesia and that's why I'm saying it's not just a crossing of the senses, because it's the extra attributes that this thing, this concept, this number or whatever has. Yeah. And you'll hear different numbers as far as is that 5% or 3%, the number of people that have synesthesia, percent of population that have synesthesia. I honestly think the number is a lot higher. Mm-hmm. Because when I start talking to people about synesthesia, and, sometimes people who say, oh, well, I don't have synesthesia, the more you talk to them, I think maybe you do have a little bit of synesthesia there, so there's so many different ways that this can present itself. And it's anytime you've got some sort of extra attribute that doesn't belong there. And my husband, I have a friend, Lisa, who he had not met. And he saw her on a Zoom call and saw that she was a brunette. And he said, well, I thought she was a blonde.
Right.
And well, no, obviously she's a brunette. And I said, well, what made you think that she was a blonde? Well, you must have said, no, why would I have said that she's and is it because her name's Lisa? Yeah, I guess maybe. And Lisa is a very yellow name between the L and the S. Those are both, yellow letters. So somebody with blonde hair whose name is Lisa, that's a really good fit. Well, she's a brunette and her name's Lisa. So, okay. It makes it harder for me to remember someone's name.
But he doesn't recognize the female part in the name of Lisa, right? Or the blonde part. That is something that you recognize directly. But perhaps because for him also it was off, there is a chance that he also has some kind or some sort of synesthesia.
Well, that Lisa is a blonde name for him. Uh-huh. So whether he has like individual graphemes, is L consistently yellow for him? Or if you take L, if you put L, I don't know, laughter, or any other L word, would it also be yellow for him? I don't know. But Lisa is a blonde name for him. So that says to me, he has a little bit of synesthesia there. Yeah. And so he is only aware of his synesthesia because he's married to a synesthete and because I'm calling him out on it.
Of course.
And that also brings me to the point where I realized that I had synesthesia. So, and this is very common. People don't know that they have synesthesia until something comes up, and I have some very early childhood memories of the colors being there. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if I talked about it. If I did, it wasn't a thing. But I do remember it. And the only reason I remember it is because I have a really, really, really good memory. And so I can remember unimportant things, like learning to write my name. And my mom wanted me to write a capital H. So Hamilton is my married name, but my maiden name also started with an H. So that capital H is very dark brown. And as a little girl, I did not like that.
You didn't like brown?
I didn't like brown, and in particular H. Capital H is, man, it's just like so square and so masculine. And, where lowercase h is a softer brown. So I was wanting to write my last name with a lowercase h. And she was trying to teach me how to write a capital H. Just like, Mom, I get it. Okay. I just don't like it.
I just don't want it.
Right.
When you read upon synesthesia, it is a lot of neurologists tend to think that children all have synesthesia. But then at a certain point, our brain obviously develops, and everything that is, let's say, not a necessary connection, it sort of dissolves. But that when you're very young, I'm not sure what age they're normally talking about, there are these connections, but then as we grow older, we tend to lose them. Is that what you think as well? Or, I mean, obviously you had synesthesia as a child, and you sort of knew from an early age that you were at least different, or maybe that you had different experiences than others.
I didn't. That's the thing. It was a realization that other people don't see the colors. So I assumed that everybody was seeing colors the same as me. And I was in my 20s. So to back to your point, that yes, absolutely, I believe that most of us start out with synesthesia as a child, and it's that there's a filter that's developed. Mm-hmm. So you've got these like unnecessary attributes that are coming in, and that our brain realizes that 5 doesn't need to be red. Red isn't relevant to 5. And so I'm gonna filter that out. And so as that filter gets developed, then the synesthesia falls away. And so we have this filter, and I probably have a filter. There are other maybe, attributes that maybe I had more synesthesia as a child than I do now. I don't know. But that would also explain why synesthesia can come on. There are people that have experienced synesthesia. It can be drug related, whatever, and that if that filter is suppressed, then the attributes are allowed to come through.
Yeah.
So it could be that the synesthesia is still there through lifelong, but it's that filter that's preventing those attributes to coming through.
Yeah, and life is full of filters. Society is full of filters. So, I mean, these are not the only filters that we have, but I feel that sometimes, especially filters to sensations, tend to be filtered even more than anything else in life. So I think it's rather normal that people growing up, depending where they are in the world, and with the creativity that they're surrounded by, the freedom that they're surrounded by to be who they want to be, freedom to say what they want to, that also has a huge influence on whether your synesthesia is continuing or not. Could you tell a little bit about your childhood? Like, did you ever feel that you were different? Like, even when you were growing up, did people look at you weirdly?
No, not at all, really, because it's entirely in my head, and even if I was aware of it, I think of it as like being left-handed. It's just a thing. It's just how I'm wired. It
comes automatically to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't overwhelm you either.
No. I think if somebody else were to somehow come into my head, they probably would be overwhelmed by it. But I have learned to tune out and sort of ignore the color. The color is there, but it's not. I can pay attention to it if I want to. It's not really distracting. So let me tell the story. So when I was in my 20s, when I realized that I was different. So by then, this was in the 80s, which is relevant. I was working in IT then, so I started out working in Well, I started out going into art and then changed my mind. I decided I wanted to not be a waitress, which was what I was going to be if I continued with my art degree. I wanted to have a decent job. And so I went into IT. That's where all the jobs were back then. And actually I enjoy working in IT. I like programming, so it's a good fit. Mm-hmm. So I was designing a COBOL program, a monster COBOL program, which was a thing that you did back in the 80s. And so I was working on this hierarchy chart. I'd been working on it all afternoon, and I had little boxes everywhere, done in pencil so that I could erase. And the last thing I needed to do was put codes on it. So I was putting codes that were a combination of letters and numbers. So I had the A1000 series, and then the B2000 series, and then the C3000 series. And then there were D's and E's, and, but at the end of the day, I was looking at this large piece of paper with pencil all over it, and there were just erase marks all over this one area, and it was the C3000. Yeah. That I thought, why did I have such a hard time writing C3? And I was like, well, what was happening? I was writing 3-3 or CC, or just dropping the C and just writing the 3, or transposing, 3C.
It almost sounds like dyslexic in this very moment.
Which I do have. So, but yeah. I don't think that was it, because it was as if 3 and C were completely interchangeable, like they were the same thing. Like to say C3 is like redundant. You don't need that C there, or you don't need the 3, because so that was the correction I was happy to make, was because of the C and the 3 being confusing. So I asked myself, and like, why is that? What is it about C and 3 where A in 1 or B in 2? Well, C and 3 are the same color. They're the exact same shade of green. They're like, it's a really bright spring green, where A is red and 1 is white, B is blue, and 2 is pink. And so none of those combinations were confusing. And then I thought, well, now, have I ever heard anybody talk about this? I wonder if other people see it that way. I wonder if that makes sense to other people. Mm-hmm. So that's where I went out and I asked my coworkers, would you agree that C and 3 are the same shade of green? And that is when I learned that other people don't see the colors.
Yeah, they told you maybe to take a break or to take a holiday.
It's like, okay, I think it's time for you to go home now.
Yeah, you've been looking at your screen for way too much time.
Right.
And even
right.
green, because it's a screen, just you said, it's this lime green, especially when it pixelates or when the motherboard is not well connected or something, it will go green.
Yeah, but no, this was, I was writing with pencil, so the color is, it's there, it's in my head, but it's like an overlay. But that's when I realized that other people don't see the colors. So again, this is in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So there is no internet. There is no Google, not even Yahoo. Okay.
No.
So there's no way to look this up.
Then to talk to people or go to a doctor. But yeah.
No. And I guess I could have gone to the library and done some research, but I wouldn't even know what to look up. Right.
Where do you start? Yeah.
And so when I tried to talk about this with people, I just, I sounded a little bit nuts. Right. And so I generally just sort of kept it to myself, and it's no big deal because it's just a thing that's in my head. It's not like it's part of my identity. Mm-hmm. It's not.
It didn't concern you.
Right. It wasn't something that I needed to share with people. So that I did share it with my husband when we started dating, because it's part of me. So people who are close to me knew about it, but that was pretty much it. And then one day, it was in the 90s, So, 15 years later, I was reading a book, and one of the main characters in the book had this condition called synesthesia, and where their letters and numbers have colors, like, oh my God, that's a thing. I'm not alone. And I had a word. And by then the internet existed. So I was able to look it up, probably on Yahoo. And I found that it's other people have it. And then that there are other forms of synesthesia. And I started reading about that and realizing that, so when I listen to music and see colors, that's also synesthesia.
Yeah. So you have two types, right? You have the number and the color, and then you have the music. So when you listen to, let's say, the Beatles, you see colors.
Right. So the thing that's challenging is like, okay, Bittersweet Symphony is one that I did a painting on. It's one of the first ones when I have a series of paintings that I've done and I'm still doing, where I listen to a song, work out the colors, and it's not deciding what the colors are, but it's deciding which parts of the song that I want to make a painting out of, and how I want to compose a painting that expresses that song. So listening to Bittersweet Symphony is tough because I've got, bittersweet and symphony. Bitter is blue, sweet is yellow, symphony is yellow. And that's because of the B's and the S's.
Sweet is yellow? Okay.
Very much because of the S. And,
okay.
So, and that's also, you asked about sweet is taboo, same deal there. That there's yellow in that because of sweet being yellow. But I also try to listen to the music. So try to ignore the lyrics, ignore the title of the song, and just listen to the music. So it's easier to do that when I'm listening to a musical interlude, so it's just the instruments. And those colors may or may not agree with the colors from the lyrics or the title. But the nice thing with Bittersweet Symphony is that the colors in the music agreed with the colors in the title. So I was like, wow, I got to do this song, because it had a very deep blue undertone. And then there's all the violins in it that are bright yellow.
This is just amazing, because when I think indeed about bitter, so I just had a podcast with a scientist, and yes, she says that most associations, she doesn't have synesthesia, but she obviously studied synesthesia. She says, yes, most bitter and salt are connected to blue, sometimes brown. But when you said, indeed, and we've talked about this, when you said sweet is yellow, for a color scientist or a color psychologist, somebody working in my field, it's red. Lemon stands for yellow. But that's the food connections that we, let's say, regulars make. So I was amazed indeed when you talked about the sweetest taboo. Indeed, that's exactly then also what happens to you. You're influenced by the name of a song, but then when you listen to the tones and the music, you hear something maybe different that is not necessary. Because for me, Sweetest Taboo by Sade, and you made a beautiful blue painting, I was thinking about red or pink, because for me, sweet is that color psychology connotation. And then you asked me if I had synesthesia, but that's how, for those who are not having synesthesia, this is just mind-blowing. It's really is.
Right. So my language, my graphene synesthesia is so strong that you mentioned pink. Mm-hmm. Well, pink is orange because P is orange. Orange is white. White is gray. And gray is green. And green is green. So that's good.
But that's listening to the words, or not listening, but reading the words. You have a different connotation than just what the rest of the world has.
Right. I can, think about it, see it, hear it, however it is, getting that word in my head based on the language, then I get the color. Sometimes it's confusing, like the whole thing when I was working on designing that COBOL program, and I got confused with the codes. Last spring, I was working on a project, or a couple of projects, where I had milestone dates that I needed to keep track of. And some of them were in May and some of them were in June. And I would see different lists and, emails. And sometimes people would write the dates out, say like June 5th spelled out June, or sometimes they would say 6/15, the 15th of June, right? Well, M is dark blue, so May is blue, and June, or the word J is sort of a reddish color, like a strawberry color. June is red, but then 5 is red and 6 is blue. And so they're opposite if you look at the numbers. And so I was having such a hard time, and then it hit me, oh, it's the synesthesia. So I just had to stop.
Yeah, and step back.
Think, every time I saw something written out, I would have to think, okay, it's a 5. Five's May. That's the earlier one. It's so absurd that I'm getting May and June confused, but I always do. Those are confusing months for me.
So we're both red to this, Julia. We're both red.
Right.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Never saw myself as a red person.
Yeah. Well, sort of pinkish.
Yeah.
So yeah, like a strawberry.
Strawberry pink. I like that. I can go with that. Yeah. You have done indeed a beautiful series of paintings, and indeed some of them I will indeed also post and on my social media that are indeed inspired by the music that you sometimes listen to as let's say a main inspiration. You just talked a little bit about that process, but how would you start? Is it you're putting on the music, you've got your canvas and you start, or is it a different process?
No, because I usually listen to it a number of times, like a lot, until it gets to the point where it's an earworm. So I have to be careful and make sure I listen to songs that I like, because the song is going to live with me for a while here. And so the entire time that I'm working on a painting, and depending on, how big the piece is, I'll be working on the painting for weeks sometimes. And so I'll have that song in my head. I wake up in the morning and that song starts running. And I don't know if other people are that, but that's another thing. I'll get a song in my head. Boy, that song is just really, really persistent. And the more stress I'm under, the more that happens. But anyhow, yeah, I'll listen to the song till it gets to the point where it's just in my head. But also I'll listen to particular points in the song to figure out, like, well, that's a really bright color there. Or, some songs I had to make a choice. Hall of the Mountain King. It's actually in the Hall of the Mountain King, Edvard Grieg. So that song starts out very, very quiet. Mm-hmm. So it's very dark, and it doesn't have not a lot there. And then as it builds, you get more and more color, more and more movement. And by the end, the orchestra is attacking their instruments, and the color is it's so intense. So I just said, well, that's the thing. Yeah. So I went with the end of the song and literally like attacked not canvas, but I work on clay board. So it's a smooth white board, and was like throwing the ink on the board. So it's got sort of a violent composition to it.
Well, I wouldn't call it violent, but it's just immediate. It's immediate. It's like literally emotion, intense, and it's throwing it onto your clayboard, and that it doesn't end there, I can imagine. But that's your start, right? That's where you start. Then the colors are on your clayboard, and then you start elaborating them.
Right. So I sort of stylize it, And so my intention is not to try to make a canvas that exactly depicts the thing in my head. I'm also wanting to make a painting that is enjoyable to look at and that more evokes the feeling that I get when I listen to the song.
Yeah.
So that's where you'll see little doodles and, shapes. And some songs are very, they float. Gravity Rides Everything by Modest Mouse is a song that has bubbles in it. And if you listen to that song, you'll hear, I think it's bongos. It's some sort of like a little orange pink sound that is floating.
So the bongos, those bubbles for you are pink.
Yeah. And orange, yes.
And orange. Obviously, as human beings, we try to rationalize, and there's no such thing. You can't rationalize color. So generally, creativity, it cannot be rationalized. That's why I think it's very beautiful that you're using, let's say, your condition. Although, obviously, as you said, it's not a sickness. It's something that is my identity. It's who I am, and how you are using that to, in the end, to make the world a prettier place. Because I think that's what art does. And I think it's amazing that you have this condition and that you can make full use of it, because I can imagine there's a lot of people who perhaps don't know they have synesthesia, or they're not quite knowing how to deal with it, and you seem to have all those elements in check because you're making it, you're using it in your best way.
Yeah, and the other thing with synesthesia, where I think that more people have synesthesia than we realize, is that there's just so many different forms. The calendar. There's a spatial synesthesia. And so a couple of things with the calendar. One is that the individual years run on a loop. So we're on a track, and it's half a mile, quarter mile, I don't know. It's a big track. It's very hard to see all the way to the other side. So given that it's December, we are rounding the short end. We are starting down one of the long sides, the winter. And so when I think about the spring, I look over there. So we're going, I guess that's counterclockwise, and summer is over here. Fall is
so summer is at your back, and you're looking towards midwinter.
Right, we're about to hit winter here. So we're rounding the short end. And so that's just always been there. And I never really thought about it until I started reading about synesthesia and the different forms. But then there's also that if I think about the years in the forms of like decades, when we went from the 90s to 2000, so 9 is a really dark blue, almost black. Mm-hmm. 1 has almost no color. It's very, yeah. So 1 almost doesn't really count. So we have the 19 is a very dark blue number. And then all of the 90s had that dark blue number. And then you put a 9 next, you put 3 9s together. That is like the darkest, the only way it could get darker is if whatever. So really, really intensely dark number. And then 2 is carnation pink, and 0 is white. So the year 2000 was just like so refreshing.
After such a dark period of apparently dark blues.
Yes. So the 90s for me were very, very, very dark. And it seems strange to me that we had like the grunge music scene, and grunge even made it into fashion, that we were all wearing cargo pants and, drab colors, and, music was very dark. Everything was dark in the 90s. And then in the year 2000, it was like we all just kind of let that go, and everything was later. And
well, pop came more. I mean, pop's always also been around in the 90s, but it's true, music became lighter, colors changed as well in fashion and interiors. But now knowing that the 2 is pink, it's interesting because then next year, obviously in 16 days, if I'm calculating correctly, or 15 days, we're going into 2022. Does that 22 make it even pinkier, or is it just pink year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, no, the 20s are very, very pink for me. And this is, it's just a very sweet time. Another thing that happened, so we had 9/11, the attacks on the World Trade Center happened, of course, in 2001. And the fashion industry and the music industry, there were people that were making conscious decisions to go with florals and pinks and fun, happy music. And, I remember reading about that there were people trying to, it's like, we need happiness, we need joy in life. And so they were intentionally going with pinks, and it's like, it all worked for me because we were in a pink millennium. So.
Well, I think there's, as you said, there's a lot of people who don't know they have synesthesia, or maybe they're keeping it for themselves, like you did most of your life. Many of them may indeed be fashion designers. I mean, I've read on the internet that people who are claiming that they have synesthesia, I think some of them are indeed fashion designers. There's a lot of musicians. There's artists indeed, as yourself. Kandinsky was always, obviously one of the most famous ones. But I do think that when times get hard, maybe we are indeed more connected again. I'm not sure how to explain that, but you see that now with COVID-19 as well. I have been I do trend research and color research, of course, for my clients. And it's interesting that florals are back again since 1 year, 2 years. Now we are seeing a lot more of the exotic florals. So you're seeing a lot of the Brazilian, the tropical ones. But it's interesting how that is indeed also coming back again at the time that, as you said, 9/11 happened. But now again, let's say we are again in a very difficult period in our lives. This time it is really global. It's nice to see how we also see indeed in research pink popping up again. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Luckily, finally, something for me, regular, is starting to make sense. Because for me, you said indeed that the number, what was it again? The number 7 is yellow. Okay. But that's a mean girl who can be trusted.
Right. Seven is, she is just very, very yellow. And I don't know if it's the color yellow that makes her mean, or if it's just, I don't know, she just is.
Yeah, funny.
And what else? Oh, days of the week. That's another thing that a lot of people have, that where Monday is blue and Wednesday is green or whatever. So that's another form of synesthesia.
Connected to the planets as well, I guess.
It's not that you're making a connection. It's just a thing that's there. Yeah, you can't try to put logic around it, because, like I said, my earliest H was brown before I learned to write my name. So I don't know how. As soon as I learned H, it was brown. So these go back to before any kind of logic or reasoning on. And you can't try to put logic around it.
No, I'm gonna give up. I'm just gonna enjoy. As for example, I enjoy it very much. So I listened to Bach's Toccata in Fugue in D minor. And that was while I was observing your painting Toccata. Even if it was online, obviously I didn't have the gallery experience. It was a different experience for me, even if it was digitally on my computer, much more in depth than simply indeed going to an art gallery, which I enjoy very much. But I can imagine that when people go to your exhibitions, and I know you can't have 11 different songs per painting, but I can imagine that people may be looking up the song on Spotify or whichever channel they're listening to, and then observing. Have you received feedback on that from obviously your visitors, but also maybe clients of yours? I'm curious to know what that's like.
Yeah, I have, and people enjoy it. And I remember sitting on a bench next to somebody who she was listening on her phone. I introduced myself and she just was really enjoying. That was Madness by Muse.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, people, they don't necessarily agree with the colors that I've chosen. And that's another thing. People, if they have synesthesia, they're probably not going to agree with the colors. So synesthetes don't usually agree on colors.
Because it's not the same for everybody, right? I mean, for you, the 5 is red, but for somebody else who maybe has the same type of synesthesia, it may not be red, right? It's a personal experience.
And in fact, I was talking to somebody about the graphene synesthesia, and I have this little iPad app that I developed that you can tap on the letters and you get sprays of color. So it's a good way of explaining color synesthesia, graphene synesthesia. So when she tapped to the H and got that brown, she said, "Oh, why is it brown?" I said, it just is. I don't have any choice in that." Yeah. And I said, "Why? What color should it be?" And she said, "Well, it should be pink." I think you have synesthesia. Yeah. So if somebody disagrees with me on the colors, then that's a sign that they may have synesthesia. Being in the room with all of these paintings inspired by synesthesia, I have had a lot of conversations like that with people.
I can imagine it.
Where they're realizing that they have synesthesia. And also, I had a conversation with a young woman who had synesthesia and had synesthesia her whole life and knew that she had, so different from me. She grew up with parents who were in tune. Not that my mother wasn't in tune, but it was the 60s. Everybody was talking about synesthesia in the 60s. So she didn't know that it was a thing to watch for. So, but this younger woman and her mother was right there. And the mother was aware that her daughter had synesthesia. So the young woman had a concussion, and the concussion caused her synesthesia to go away.
Wow.
And then once she didn't enjoy music as much. She used to love listening to music, in part because of the color. And then when her concussion went away, the synesthesia came back. It makes sense with it being a filter, that the concussion was allowing the filter to work. Maybe the concussion was preventing the synesthesia from coming through. I don't know. Whatever. It was an interesting conversation.
Very interesting. Where do you get your inspiration? Obviously also through music, but you are an artist in the end. An artist, yes, with synesthesia, but where do you get inspiration? Is it out in the nature? Where do you get inspired?
I don't always work with the synesthesia. So I am, right now I'm working on a body of work that has to do with the pandemic and the strange, stressful times that we're living under, especially in the United States. And that on top of the pandemic, we have political extremes, and that we're so divided as a country. And there's so much misinformation out there, and that has worked against us with the pandemic. So it's all related. So I'm working on like this piece that you see behind me. There are 3 blue panels. 2 are up on the wall. The other is sitting. So this is not quite finished yet, but it's very close. Well, I have a show coming up next summer at Sean Christopher Gallery, and it's not until July, I think, but it's next summer. And so this one needs to be done for that show. So I've got time. But this piece the title is 400,000 Souls. And that came from last year, at the end of the year. There was this kind of quiet news story that in the United States, we were expected to surpass 400,000 deaths from COVID in the year 2020. And the reason this wasn't a major news story is because there were so many other unbelievable things happening, in between November and the end of the year and January. Okay. Yeah. And so it really hit me that number. I was having a hard time wrapping my head around 400,000 people. I've been to like the OSU Michigan game, in OSU Stadium, so I can picture 100,000 people.
Yep.
But then taking that crowd of people and trying to multiply that by 4, I can't really do that. I couldn't picture that number.
No, who would?
And so what I decided to do, if something is bothering me or sitting on my head, but just not necessarily bothering me, but anything that is affecting me this much, it makes me think I need to do a painting around that. Also, how can I make a painting that in some way honors those people that died? So this piece, 400,000 Souls, across these 4 panels, they contain 400,000 white dots. So I went with a dark blue underpainting, and that's with the alcohol ink. And then I have these white pens. They're acrylic, actually nail pens that you would use to draw designs on your nails. Yeah. But the thing that I like about this particular white pen is that it's the alcohol ink bleeds through. So you put a white dot down and then whatever color underneath bleeds through. So I get my white dots are not just white dots because they have that color coming through. So I developed a system, and I actually did a prototype, proof of concept, a lot of work on this to make sure that I was going to be able to do this. So I have this basket of pasta, so little uncooked ziti, and I put a divider in it, and I counted out 200 of them, and then I put 400 pieces of tape across these panels. And so I would peel a piece of tape off and then pick up a piece of pasta and draw 5 dots, drop the pasta, pick up another piece of pasta, draw 5 dots, and drop it in the other half. So by the time I've transferred the 200 pieces of pasta from one side to the other, I've drawn 1,000 dots. And so for each of the 400 pieces of tape, I did that little process of drawing the dots, and that's how I counted 400,000 dots on these boards. And now I can picture 400,000 because I can look at this. And I'm hoping that when other people look at this piece and get up close and see all of those little dots, they can sort of vicariously experience 400,000 the way I experienced the number 400,000. And drawing those, they can look at those dots and think about what it would be like. Because I had people do that. They'll say, well, how long did it take you to do that? Because they're thinking about the experience of it. So,
and you're thinking about all those people that left this earth.
And I'm designing another piece, and I think I want to do this one. This will be sort of a continuation where there will be overlap because I want to start with the beginning of the pandemic. So starting with March of 2020, it's the number of people who died in the U.S. from COVID. And this one will be more time-based so that it will be month after month, and it will be an ongoing piece. So until we get this thing under control, I'm going to be working on this piece. So by next summer's show, it will be a work in progress. I don't expect the pandemic to be gone by then, realistically. No. So I'm going to use glass block, where each month is a glass block, and whatever it takes to get the number, I'm going to do the same thing with the dots. So there will be months where I will probably have layers of dots because there won't be enough room to put, 90,000 dots in one block. They'll have to be layered. but then there will be some dots or some months that will not have very many dots. And so then I'll have a platform that this will go on, and then they can be piled up. And the way it's presented won't necessarily be the same every time. It depends, so we'll have flexibility.
Yeah. It just makes me a little bit silent. I know I'm supposed to be, asking you questions and go into more detail, but I think it's overwhelming what you're telling. And I think the whole situation is overwhelming. You have a gift. I think that's very clear. You've decided to share this also with the rest of the world, and how, especially with this last work that you're working on, is a gift to others as well, to, I don't know, maybe to come to a certain awareness, to let go of certain feelings or emotions. And I think the day that we're allowed back in the United States again, I definitely want to see your work. That I think a lot of people that are listening right now, they're going to be very, very curious. And I think the topic is emotional. And I think that's also what maybe you want to reach, right? For people to get in touch with their emotions when they look at your work, but also with everything that's happening. You got emotional. That's why you wanted to do this work. And that's also what you want to bring out there, I imagine.
And I do also want to have a little bit of humor in the show with the pandemic. And I'm writing haiku, and so I want to take those and make some pieces that are a little bit illustrative to go with the haikus. And like the idea that I'm a house cat, really. It's kind of how I feel these days. I don't actually go outside very much. And so that I'm connecting with my cats in a way that I haven't before, because I feel like I'm one of them. So I've got some pieces that are a little bit humorous, and so I want there to be a little bit of lightness. You can't have artwork about the pandemic without there being sadness to it. But if we don't laugh, we'll cry, and so we need to find humor.
Yeah. It's very well thought that you're putting that together. So yes, this is a fact. This is sad. Like, people watch and look and experience, but at the same time, do it with a smile, or try to, make people smile again and give them a sense of hope maybe as well.
And looking at it could have been worse. The fact that we can use Zoom, the fact that we can work from home, and that we have stayed connected through social media. And if we didn't have that, how isolated we would be.
Yeah.
So I'm designing a piece around that to have things, little pieces that are connected.
Yeah.
By a web.
Sounds like you already have your next project.
Yeah. I always have a number of projects in my head. And also I'm using my technology background in my artwork. So to sort of address the fake news that we're getting.
Indeed, because I was about to ask you, you studied indeed fine art, that's what you said, at the Cincinnati University. That didn't, it was not quite it, or at least you didn't feel that you're going to get a good job in that. So then you went to computer sciences. That still influences you. So both, you obviously are an artist, but let's say it was not for nothing, the fact that you studied computer sciences, because you're still applying that every day, right?
Right. And I'm a business analyst, and so I'm still technical, and I love programming. They don't let me program at work anymore, so because they needed a business analyst, and so I'm in that role now, and that's fine. But I do programming for my art. So I went back to school recently and got my Master of Fine Arts. And what I learned there is that there's a programming environment for artists. So it's the processing environment, processing.org. And you can make artwork that you can do programming, and in doing your programming, you're making art. And so I am designing an installation piece that will not it might not even have any actual physical painting or drawing on it. That it's entirely technology based.
Okay.
So it will have, physical presentation and there will be colors to it because,
That's what you do.
Right. But you will make choices on it. So you'll have buttons. I love buttons. I love pushing buttons. So I found some really cool buttons that I can change the color on the button. And so that's good. This one deals with like false choices.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a thing that people are doing now to try to convince us of their side. They're giving us a false choice. And I think one of the best examples is that in order for us to have border security, in our southern border with Mexico, we have to put children in cages, okay? Which is wrong. So you do not have to choose between border security and compassion.
But they're making you.
So, right. That is so to try to make us choose between border security and compassion, that's a false choice. Mm-hmm. And so you'll have 3 buttons and you can pick one or the other, or you can pick the false choice button in the middle. And that's the correct choice. We should reject a false choice. Yeah. We shouldn't have to say, well, I choose compassion, which means we won't have border security. And you've got people saying that anyone who wants us to be compassionate at the border is saying that we should not have border security. And that's not it at all. That's a false choice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not black and white. No choice is black and white. But that's an interesting type of work. And I think indeed a lot of artists work indeed with current situations that are, let's say, influencing society and how people are feeling. And you have this beautiful way of capturing that and translating that. And it sounds like this is indeed one of your next projects. I can't wait to see them. I'm going to be following you. And I think a lot of people are going to be following you. This has been an amazing talk. I think I could talk to you for more hours, but that's a little bit of the questions that I had for you. And I want to thank you really for your time and for sharing your beautiful experiences with us regulars in color.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been a pleasure.
So this was Judith Van Vliet from the Color Authority. Thank you for listening again to yet another episode. If you haven't done so, please go to Apple Podcasts, subscribe, review, and send us feedback on this episode. And I hope that you will be listening to the next episode coming out very, very soon. Thank you and have an amazing, colorful day.